and I'd kind of like to get a feel. Are you guys, how many of you are building officials? Okay. How many are general contractors? And how many are licensed for asbestos work? So, okay. Do we have any landfill operators here? Any landfill operators? No? Okay. Sometimes we have some landfill operaters show up, and I always like to figure out who they are so I can draw them into the conversation and put them on the spot. But our Tidewater office is located in Virginia Beach, and we have 4 solid waste inspectors out there, Jeff Deibler, Deborah Trent, Keith Kren, and Sean Fries. And they were supposed to be here today, this morning, but maybe they'll be coming this afternoon. We also have Jed Castorella, who's from our Harrisonburg office, here with me today, who will help me out if I miss something. So anyway, like Doug said at the beginning of the day, this workshop came out of some interaction that we had where we kind of identified a need for some outreach to building officials. There seemed to be some breakdown in communication and understanding about what regulations apply, when and where. And so we wanted to try to kind of bring everybody to the same page and try to fill in those information gaps. So just kind of an overview of where we've been so far this morning. Typically you've got a project that you're working on, you've got a worker working on that project, and then you generate waste materials out of that project. Department of Labor and Industry has the NESHAP regulation and the BOSH regulations that they enforce and administer. And so those cover actually all 3 parts of the project. You've got D4 that does the operator licensing, and then you have the DEQ, and that's where we come in. And that's what I'm going to talk about is the waste management part. And it's just a small part of what we've been talking about today. The solid waste management regulations are found at 9 VAC 20-80. So that's Chapter 80. And we're in the process of trying to revoke Chapter 80 and publish Chapter 81. It went to Governor Kane's office where he left office, and it's been sitting there ever since. There are a lot of really good things in Chapter 81 that would help businesses, and we're hoping that the governor will realize that one day and sign it and get it out of his office. And when he does, some of the citations that are referenced in my slides that are shown up on the bottom are going to change. So I just wanted to point that out. Currently, if you go to the website today and you look under laws and regulations, you would want to go to section 640, and that's where the asbestos regulations are found. Basically, the asbestos regulations that you find in the solid waste management regulations are cut and paste from the NESHAP. So Doug has been talking about the NESHAP regulation all morning. If you go to the same section, that 40 CFR 61 section, and you start reading along in the waste management section, you'll see that that's where our regulations come from. Doug kind of I'm going to repeat some of the information that Doug talked about today because that's how you determine whether you become subject to our regulation or not. Like he said, there's kind of 3 questions that a contractor needs to ask him or herself. And is it a facility that's regulated under NESHAP? Is it a demolition or renovation activity? And the third question, do you exceed the threshold amounts of regulated asbestos-containing material? And again, Doug went through what the definition of a facility was: buildings, bridges, 4 or more residential buildings. We went through the exemptions this morning. So single-family homes being demolished by the homeowner is exempt. So if you're exempt from NESHAP, you're exempt from our solid waste regulations. There's 1 or 2 exceptions, but I just want to point that out. So if you're not subject to NESHAP, you're not subject to our regulation for asbestos. You're subject to the rest of the provisions of the solid waste chapter. Someone was asking about the definition of demolition and renovation. This is a part of the definition of demolition and renovation, and again, it comes from a federal requirement. So we're very consistent between DOLI and DEQ. When you do your demolition, if you have the regulated asbestos-containing material, we'll go back over that definition here in a second. If you have RACM, and you would see the 216 feet of pipe, the 150 square feet of other facility components, or 35 cubic feet of material that's been removed, then you're subject to the NESHAP and you're subject to the management requirements in the DEQ waste regulations. So the definition of RACM is friable asbestos. It's category 1 non-friable that has become friable. It's category 1 non-friable that will be or has been subject to sanding, grinding, cutting, or grading. So those would be things like instead of D9 running over the material, maybe a saw cutting through some shingles or something like that. Category 2 non-friable is ACM that has a high probability of becoming or has become crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to powder during the demolition and renovation process. So it's important to kind of keep those definitions in mind, because these are category where a lot of confusion comes into play is the category 1 and 2 non-friable materials that can become friable during the demolition and renovation projects. Again, private homeowners are exempt from working on their own property. And the other thing that's exempt is the removal of non-friable asbestos-containing material, as long as the material is not in poor condition and it remains non-friable during all phases of removing, handling, and waste disposal. And that's the key thing. A lot of people think they go through and they do the inspection or the asbestos survey that's required by DOLI, and they say, well, all of our stuff is non-friable. I'm now exempt from the NESHAP, so I don't have to worry about anything else as far as refinancing goes. But if you bulldoze that structure and run over it 20 times with a D9 and you subject it to grinding and braiding forces, you may have rendered that non-friable material friable. So now that material is subject to the NESHAP and the DEQ regulations. And I think a lot of people miss that. They say, I don't have non-friable, I don't have to worry about it, I can now go about and do my job the way I want to do it. But if you change the condition of that material, you're now subject to all the regulations you were initially exempt from. So that's really important. And this is a real important, as we get over and we talk about delivering the material to different types of facilities, this becomes a real concern for us when people take non-friable material to a transfer station. A transfer station is where waste goes to a centralized location from smaller collection vehicles, and it gets loaded up into a larger transportation vehicle, and then from there it goes on to a landfill. Well, when those smaller vehicles come to the transfer station, they tip that material on a concrete floor, and that material may get moved around quite a bit before it gets loaded up into another vehicle. So we're very concerned about worker exposure to non-friable asbestos at a transfer station, but we don't currently have any prohibitions on sending non-friable material there. During demolition and renovation projects, you have to remove all the RACM from a facility that's being demolished before the demolition and renovation activity begins. Department of Labor and Industry has all kinds of requirements about wetting material and managing the material. You want to tuck it over the edge of the building. You want to gingerly handle this material so you don't have any exposures. While you're containerizing it and to ensure that you properly containerize, you can't have any visible emissions from your containers. So you need to, after you wet it, you remove it, put it in sealed containers. It might be small plastic bags, it might be a roll-off that has been lined. All of the RACM containers have to be labeled. And the labeling requirements we actually reference back to the GOSH regulations. The labels are very prescribed about the font size, the font height, and what it has to say. If you don't remove the RACM from a demolition project before you demo the building, then all of the material from that project is considered regulated asbestos-containing material. So that means that if you only had a small portion of the building that had RACM and then you didn't take it out, now the entire load is considered RACM. If you're planning on taking it to a particular landfill, that facility would have to be regulated to be able to receive the regulated asbestos containing material. And there aren't many facilities in Virginia that are permitted to do so. A lot of people think that they can just demo the whole building, and then they find out, oh my gosh, my whole load is now RACM, and now it's costing them an arm and a leg, and they didn't factor that into their cost when they do the project. When you transport the material RACM, you have to transport it in vehicles that are marked. And again, we were referenced back to the Department of Labor and Industry regulations about how they're supposed to be marked. They also have to comply with the DOT regulations. Does anybody know who administers the DOT marking and placarding regulations? Anybody want to venture a guess? There is a federal arm, yeah. But in Virginia, the Virginia State Police has a motor carrier safety program, and the motor carrier safety officers administer the DOT regulations. So when you see a state police have a tractor trailer pulled over doing an inspection on the vehicle, that's most likely a motor carrier safety officer that's doing that inspection. So if you have any questions about marking and placarding, or a contractor does, how their vehicles should be marked or placarded, they can call the local state police office to figure out who in their region can answer those questions. All shipments of RACM have to be accompanied by a shipment record. It's kind of like a waste manifest. If you've ever seen a hazardous waste manifest, it looks very similar. It has information about who the generator is, the name and address. It has information about the material, how much there is, how it's containerized. It's got information about the person transporting the material, where it's going to. And then there's a certification at the bottom that says, what I've told you on this paper is true and accurate to the best of my knowledge. When the load gets to the waste management facility, the transporter has to present the waste management facility operator with the waste shipment record. And the waste shipment record should be a copy of the final shipment record with the waste management facility signature on it. It should be sent back to the generator within 35 days. If the generator doesn't have a copy of that final shipment record back within 35 days, they're required to start figuring out where that shipment is. And within 45 days, if they don't have it sorted out, they have to notify the Department of Labor and Industry. That's a really good slide. And I tried to fix this slide this morning, but in a problem that I have with converting Microsoft Office 2007 over to Microsoft Office 2003, I converted this text box over to a graphic, and so I couldn't modify this for this reason. So in Virginia, if you've got friable or regulated asbestos containing material, and you want to ship it to a disposal facility, you have to ship it to a disposal facility that's permitted to accept that friable material, or the non-friable that's likely to become friable. And most landfills in Virginia can accept non-friable. It's just the regulated asbestos containing material they can't accept. In my region, in the western part of the state, we only have two facilities: First Piedmont Corporation, which is an commercial industrial landfill, and Smith Gas Sanitary Landfill. Those are the only two facilities in the western part of the state that can accept regulated asbestos containing material. A lot of people in my area ship out to Can Sanitary Landfill in West Virginia. So if you have non-friable asbestos containing material, you did your inspection, you don't have any RACM, but you've got some non-friable stuff, and you pull that off the building, you can take that to a sanitary landfill, and there's no notification requirement. You can take it to a transfer station, and there's no notification requirement. But, and so typically, you don't have to let the receiving facility know that you're bringing them non-friable. The only thing that we have in the regulations where there's a notification requirement is at facilities facilities that don't apply daily cover. And what daily cover is at sanitary landfills, they have to put on 6 inches of soil cover or some other alternative cover over the material every night to keep birds and other animals from scavenging material. At some CDD facilities, construction, demolition, debris facilities, or industrial landfills, they're not required to put daily cover on. So if you're going to haul your non-friable asbestos into a CDD or an industrial landfill, you do have to notify that facility because they may not be applying daily cover, and they need to know that so they can put it in a special area and put cover on it immediately. So that's the only notification requirement for non-friable material in Virginia at this point. Now, this is the minimum requirements in the regulations. We have a number of facilities in my region out in the Roanoke area, in the New River Valley, that have they're operating as resource authorities, and they have created an extra level of notification based on how they want to run their operation. So before you can bring non-friable in, they actually require that you notify them. So they go a step above and beyond the state regulation. So if you've got a contractor working on a job, or you're working on a job and you're bidding a job, and you know that you want to take it into a particular facility, it's good to go ahead and contact them before you bid the job. Know what your notification requirements are, because they might have some additional requirements that the state doesn't require. And I think it's really good. It's real good business practice to have good open communication with your disposal facilities. And again, so this really applies to the landfills. When they go to place the material in the cell, they have to unload it so that there are no visible emissions as they're placing it in. The facility has to keep copies of all the shipment records. They have to mark in the cell where the asbestos or the regulated asbestos-containing material is located. Smith Gap Sanitary Landfill, which is a fairly large facility out in the Roanoke area, they actually GPS the location of the RACM every day. So when they receive a load, it gets direct hauled into their facility. The driver drives to the working base, they dig a hole, they place the waste, cover it up, they GPS the location, and they keep a record of that. And that's so if we ever mine the facilities later for metals and things like that, we know where that RACM is, we can avoid it. Now, that doesn't help us with the non-friable because there's a requirement for that. But they have to keep records of waste shipments, the amount that they receive. They have to know the condition of the containers that came into the facility. And they need to notify the Department of Labor and Industry if there's a significant discrepancy in between what's on the shipment record and what they actually receive. If there's a discrepancy, they need to try to figure out what the discrepancy was and figure out why there's a discrepancy. And they need to figure out that discrepancy within 15 days. And then they need to report that discrepancy and the explanation to the Department of Labor and Industry. They need to keep copies of their records for at least 2 years. And again, like I said, they have to keep a record of where the waste was placed within the unit. So, like I said, there's very few regulations that apply compared to all of the notification and inspection requirements that the Department of Labor and Industry has. Does anybody have any questions?
That's all of our presentation. You guys are free to go unless you have some questions for us. Yes, sir.
Is there a certified disposal area in Richmond area?
King and Queen is one of the landfills in Amelia.
I know that it takes it. If you want to give me your email address, I can call you.
Okay.